Hi everybody, welcome back to class. This week, what we're focusing on is the passage 9:35 to 11:1. If you recall from our class, this is the segment in which Jesus sends out his disciples to essentially replicate his ministry. In class, I unpacked how essentially Matthew's gospel from 4:23 to 11:1 is Jesus's demonstration of the kingdom in word and deed. So we saw in chapters 5 to 7, we saw the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is teaching the ethic of the kingdom. In our previous assignment, we focused on 8:1 to 9:34 or 9:35 and looked at the mighty acts of Jesus. So essentially, 5 to 7 are Jesus's teachings about the kingdom. Matthew 8 and 9, roughly, are Jesus's actions that signify the kingdom. This segment, 9:35 to 11:1, Jesus is now going to empower his disciples to replicate what he does, with a couple of exceptions, which we'll see as you do this next assignment. Now, framing all that, so we had 4:23, 24, and 25. 9:35 and 11:1, we have these little summaries of Jesus' ministry. Now, this week's assignment, it runs from 9:35 again to 11:1, and it's two parts. The first part, you're going to do a survey of this segment. So 9:35 to 11:1, that's the block that you're going to be surveying. So it's important to go back and look at Lesson 2's instructions, because that includes all of the elements that you need to do for your survey. Again, you're going to give brief titles to paragraphs, and then you're going to study the structure, which is either a chart or an outline that shows your main units and subunits. Again, you're going to have at least 2 main units. If you have more than 4, make sure you justify that. And then for each of your main units, you're going to have 2 to 4 subunits. Then find 3 to 4 structural laws that connect the main units together or control 50% of the material. Ask questions, a set of questions for each of the structures that you find. Find a strategic area that best represents each of those structures. Make a reference about what the genre is. Comment on the mood. Again, that's a few adjectives, and then include any other miscellaneous data that doesn't fit into those other categories. So work on that survey, and you need to do it sort of quickly, because this is a bigger assignment this time, because we're going to do a survey and an interpretation. So try to spend about 3 hours on the survey. So work quickly and do the best you can on that, and then focus your attention on an interpretation. Now, what we're doing is we're skipping that detailed observation step where you do lots of observations and generate questions, because what I've done is I've generated the questions for you here for this assignment. So I want you to focus on answering these questions in this assignment. And we're going to focus your attention not on the entire passage, but on the first piece of this passage, 9:35 through 38, the last paragraph of chapter 9. That gives you a limited focus. Again, some of you are wanting to do everything. IBS is not so you can do everything. It's so you can take a small amount of time that you have and do a great job on a portion of it. So you're not going to answer every question that you might have about 9:35 to 11:1. I want you to focus on these questions. So these are in the syllabus. This is just a direct replication of what's in the syllabus and that I posted online. So what specifically is involved in the compassion of Jesus? This shows up in 9:35 to 38. So what you're going to try to gather evidence that can help you describe and define what compassion means in this context. I'll say more about that in a minute. Then you can follow that up with, how does Jesus' compassion, serve as the cause for the calling and sending of disciples? Okay, that's another focus on 9:35 to 38. How does this set up what you're going to see in chapter 10? And then how does the role of the disciples flow from Jesus' compassion? I'm going to say this is only if you have enough time and you can do a quick scan through chapter 10, I want you to focus most of your attention on 9:35 to 38. Again, this class, it's more important that you do a substantive job on something each week than do a superficial attempt to try to answer everything. I'm looking for your method, so I want to see you dig in deeply. So if you would only get through, say, this first question, but you do it substantively, I'm going to be more interested in that than you giving me a couple of sentences about each of these three questions, okay? So if you're a perfectionist, shut the perfection down. You don't have to do all three. I want you to do a really excellent job on one. If you find you have time and you're interested in, go for these other ones, but focus most of your attention on the first question, okay? Now, how do you answer that? What we're going to move to, again, we've practiced detailed observation where you made observations and then asked questions. Again, these are the kind of questions that would come out of a detailed observation. So now I want you to now focus your attention on going back into 9:35 and 38 and making observations in 9:35 to 38 that could serve as an answer to these questions. So you want to gather evidence from 9:35 to 38, and then instead of asking more questions now, think of your inferences as pieces of the answer to this question. So you make an observation and then say, this evidence implies, this evidence suggests that this is true. All right, let me give you an example of that just to get things started. So if we look at 9:35, it says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. We can make the observation in 9:35 that the immediate context for Jesus's compassion is Jesus's ministry activity. And we can be specific here so we can list out the things that Jesus was doing. So look at 9:35. Preaching the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease and sickness. So in this case, we have it preaching the kingdom. And healing. So what does this suggest about what's involved in Jesus' compassion? Well, this doesn't define compassion, but notice that we can suggest that compassion flowed out of Jesus's missional work. Again, that's just one example. I don't want to do too much of this for you, but you want to build a series. You want to move from observation from the text, now not to answering questions, but to making more observations. Now, what you may find is that one observation leads to some question that you have, then you make another observation. So you want to make a lot of observations. One of the things I do want to say is I keep getting questions about how do I know when I'm done? You're done when you've done a great job. Now, there's always more to do, okay? So you want to watch the clock. I would say this assignment should take a minimum, the whole thing, minimum of 6 hours, but as much as 8. So if you're not putting 6 to 8 hours in this work, don't ask if it's enough, because it isn't. Put the time in. It takes time to do a deep dive. This is not to do some superficial kind of work that you could have done without coming to seminary. I want you to push yourself to dig as deeply as you can into the text. That's what this is ultimately about. We want to become profound, confident, inspiring interpreters of God's truth for the sake of the world. We have to reintroduce the scriptural story to the world, and maybe for some of us in the class we need to reintroduce the scriptural story to ourselves. So dig deeply, push yourself. Think of it as a gold mine. How much gold do you want to get out of this text? But at the same time, there's a balance. and I'm especially speaking to persons who may be perfectionists here, it's not going to be perfect. This is a work in progress. So give yourself sufficient time, but set some boundaries on yourself. I don't expect you to work more than 8 hours on this assignment. So do watch your clock. So this is one thing. So you're going to work through and work on the context. Okay, remember this is immediate context, 9:35 to 38. If you have time, then do work on the next level of context. Quick scan through chapter 10. Is there any evidence in chapter 10 that you might be able to use here? So you can. This would be immediate context. Then segment context would be 9:35 to 11:1 as a whole. And then also think about the broader book. Now here's the key thing for doing broader book in this piece. Try to find other places in Matthew where this same word compassion shows up. So this is a little bit of a limited word study. You're going to only focus on how it shows up in Matthew. And that'll give you some data, and that's a great place in this case to stop. Now, when you see my work next week, I'm going to show you a couple of other things that you can use to answer this question, but I want you to focus intensively on the context here. So most intensely on 9:35 to 38. Reflect briefly on if there's any other evidence in 9:35 to 11:1 as a whole. And if you're going to move to these other two questions, you'll need that. And then look at compassion in the rest of Matthew's gospel to see if there's some clues there. Then the last thing that you need to do is you need to look at least two commentaries. And this is the last thing that you want to do. And again, you want to spend maybe about 30 minutes or so, that's it out of this whole thing, in the commentaries, reading what other interpreters have said and make some notes. And what you're looking for, how do these commentaries maybe fill in gaps that you missed? How does it challenge what you found? How does it confirm what you found? So just make some notes. You'll know when you do a deep dive, you're going to know where your own weaknesses and holes are in your interpretation. So use the commentary to help fill out that. But you're not relying primarily on the commentary. This is just a short part. So write that up, just a couple paragraphs. Make sure you give bibliographical references. So write what the commentary is, who's the author, the whole thing, just like it's a footnote. And make sure you give page numbers too. And then the last thing, write a synthesis. And the synthesis should just be a summary that answers these questions. And again, mostly this first question. Okay, I think this is enough to get you started. I'll look forward to looking at your work. Remember, this whole thing is a process, so put the time in. You'll be happy with where you end up at the end of the semester. Again, thanks for listening. Again, we'll see you next time. I'm Brian Russell, and I'm expecting great things from you this week.